Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel Universal English with Happy. I am Happy Verma, your English language coach. Today we are going to explore one of the most fascinating parts of the English language, the ability of words to mean much more than their dictionary definitions. When we communicate, we don't always say exactly what we mean in a literal sense. For example, if I say, I'm drowning in work, you immediately understand that I'm not literally underwater. Am I right? Perfect. If I say she has a heart of gold, you don't imagine that her heart is actually made of gold. And if someone says he is a lion in the classroom, we don't suddenly expect that person to roar, wow. We understand the intended meaning behind the words. That is where figures of speech become important. Today we are going to begin with the basics and gradually move toward more advanced devices. We will understand what figures of speech are, why writers and speakers use them, how to identify them, how to distinguish between similar devices, and most importantly, how to use them naturally in your own English. And I want you to remember one thing throughout this lesson. Don't just learn the names of figures of speech, learn to recognize what the language is doing. Because once you understand that, English becomes much more expressive. Let's begin with a simple question. Can a person really have a heart of stone? If we interpret that sentence literally, the answer is obviously no. A big no. A human heart is made of biological tissue. It is not made of stone. But when someone says he has a heart of stone, we immediately understand something about that person's personality. We understand that the person may be emotionally cold, insensitive, harsh, or unwilling to show compassion. Notice what has happened here. The words have moved beyond their literal meaning. The speaker has taken the physical quality of stone, hardness, coldness, lack of flexibility, and transferred their quality to a person, emotional in nature. And that is one of the most powerful things language can do. Instead of saying he is emotionally insensitive, does not show compassion, we can say he has a heart of stone. The second sentence is shorter, but it creates a much stronger image. You can actually visualize idea. This is why figures of speech are so important in literature. Speeches, advertising, films, conversations, and even everyday English. Let me give you another one. If I say she has a heart of gold, what does that tell you about her? Does it tell you anything about her anatomy? No, not at all. It tells you about her character. Gold is valuable, precious, highly regarded. So the expression transfers those qualities to the person's character. This is the magic of figurative speech. Now, here's something extremely important. You might think figures of speech belong only to Shakespeare, poetry, or difficult literature, but they don't. We use them every day. In fact, many figures of speech have become so common that we don't even notice them anymore. Look at he is drowning in work. He is not actually drowning. The idea of drowning represents being overwhelmed. She has a heart of gold. Again, not literal. And the classroom was a zoo. There aren't actually lions, monkeys, and elephants sitting in the classroom. The speaker is comparing the classroom's noise and disorder to the chaos of a zoo. This tells us something very important. Figurative language is not necessarily complicated language. Sometimes the most ordinary conversational expressions are figurative. For example, I'm feeling under the weather. That exam killed me. I've got tons of homework. This phone costs an arm and a leg. He broke her heart. I'm bursting with excitement. All of these communicate ideas beyond their literal meanings. So, as an English learner, don't only ask, what does this word mean? Also ask, what does this sentence mean in context? That distinction is extremely important for becoming an advanced English speaker. Here's the journey we are going to take. First, we'll establish the foundation. We'll understand the difference between literal and figurative speech. Then we will move into major figures of speech such as simile, metaphor, personification, hyperbole, and several others. After that, we'll move into more advanced devices such as oxymoron, paradox, metonymy, zeugma, and chiasmus, or we could say chiasmus. Finally, we will practice identifying figures of speech. The objective isn't simply to memorize 20 or 30 definitions. The real objective is to develop a mental system. When you see a sentence, you should eventually be able to ask, is this a comparison? Or is this exaggeration? Is something non-human behaving like a human? Are opposite ideas being placed together? Is there repetition? Or is there wordplay? That is how you become fast and accurate in examinations and more effective in communication, particularly. Let's define a central concept. A figure of speech is specially a way of expressing an idea that departs from ordinary to literal expression in order to create a particular effect. Let's compare two sentences. He is very brave in battle. That is straightforward, right? It tells us a fact. Now, he is a lion in battle. Obviously, he isn't biologically a lion, but the comparison gives us a collection of qualities: courage, strength, fearlessness, aggression, perhaps leadership. So, one word, lion, allows us to communicate several qualities simultaneously. That is the power of figurative speech or language. From an academic perspective, figures of speech are rhetorical, or literally devices that manipulate ordinary language to create a special effect. They can compare, they can exaggerate, they can contrast, they can create sound patterns, they can create humor, they can create abstract ideas concrete, and they can make an audience feel something rather than merely understand something. If you are preparing for competitive examinations, don't memorize that definition alone. Understanding the mechanism. Every figure of speech has something that it does. Simile compares. Metaphor equates. Personification humanizes. Hyperbole exaggerates. Alliteration repeats initial consonant sounds. Once you understand the mechanism, identification becomes much easier. This distinction is the foundation of the entire lesson. Excuse me. Literal language means the words generally mean exactly what they say. For example, the water temperature is 100 degrees Celsius. That's factual. We don't need to interpret hidden imagery, but the boiling sun baked the dessert. The sun isn't literally an oven. The dessert isn't literally being placed inside a baking machine. The sentence creates an image of intense heat. So literal language is generally direct and factual, while figurative language creates associations and imagery. Now here's an important warning, very important one. Figurative language does not mean that the sentence is false. It means the sentence communicates meaning through something beyond strict literal interpretation. Consider my manager is a machine. Is that factually true? No. But perhaps the speaker means my manager works extremely hard. So the sentence is literally false but figuratively meaningful. That is why context matters. Let's take a look at a mini exercise. I'll give you three sentences. Number one, the baby is sleeping. Literal. Number two, the baby is sleeping like an angel. Figurative, especially a simile. Number three, the baby is an angel. That could be metaphorical. Notice how a small change in language changes the relationship between the speaker and the meaning. So why not simply say everything directly? Why? He is extremely brave, which we can say. He is a lion. Why? Because figurative language creates imagery. It helps us see. It helps us feel. It helps us remember. Imagine a motivational speaker saying, "You should continue working despite difficulties." That's perfectly correct. But compare. When the storm comes, don't abandon the ship. Now you have created a mental picture. The storm represents difficulty. The ship represents your journey. Abandoning the ship represents giving up. A single image can communicate an entire philosophy. Figures of speech also create emotional impact. Advertising uses this constantly. A company might not simply say, "Our product is reliable." Instead, it might position the product as your trusted companion. Now the product has been given a relationship with the customer. So figurative language is not just about literature. It is also about persuasion, branding, speeches, storytelling, and communication. Before we start learning individual devices, let's create categories. This is extremely useful because memorizing 20 different names independently can become confusing. We can group them according to what they do. First, comparison and contrast. Simile and metaphor compare. Antithesis, oxymoron, and paradox deal with contrast or contradiction. Then we have exaggeration and meaning-based expression. Hyperbole, irony, sarcasm, litotes, understatement, and euphemism all manipulate meaning in different ways. Then we have sound devices, alliteration, assonance, consonance, onomatopoeia. And then we have rhetorical structures such as anaphora, epistrophe, chiasmus. The benefit of classification is very simple. Instead of asking which of these 20 definitions do I remember, you can ask what is happening in this sentence. Is there comparison? Is there exaggeration? Is there repetition? Is there contrast? Is there sound repetition? That gives your brain a shortcut. So here, let's begin with one of the most recognizable figures of speech, simile. A simile makes an explicit comparison between two different things. The most common connecting words are like, as if, and as though. For example, he runs like the wind. We are comparing his speed with the speed of the wind. She is as brave as a lion. We compare her bravery with that associated with the lion. The baby slept like a log. The comparison communicates deep, motionless sleep. Now here's the key. A simile usually has two things. The thing being described and the thing used for comparison. Let's take the fighter moved like lightning. What are we describing? The fighter. What are we comparing him with? Lightning. What quality is being transferred? Speed. That's the mental process you should develop. Don't simply search for the word like. Ask, is like actually connecting two different things in a comparison? Because sometimes like is simply a verb. Let's take simile a little further. Consider, her smile was bright as the morning sun. The comparison is between her smile and the morning sun. But what exactly are we comparing? Not physical structure. We are comparing brightness. Now the fighter jet cut through clouds like a knife through butter. That's a much more elaborate comparison. The speaker wants us to imagine smooth, effortless movement. This is a great example of why identifying the figure of speech is only the first step. The next question should be, why did the writer choose this comparison? The question moves us from grammar into literary analysis. We also have the famous line from Robert Burns, "My love's like a red, red rose." Again, the beloved is compared to a rose. The point is not that the person is literally a flower. The rose may suggest beauty, freshness, delicacy, or love. Not every sentence containing like is a simile. This is very important. For example, I like ice cream. Is that a comparison? It's just a statement. So, no. Like here means enjoy. So remember, like plus comparison is equal to potentially simile. And like plus preference or action, not necessary simile. Correct. Now we move to metaphor. If simile says, he fights like a tiger, metaphor says, he is a tiger in battle. There is no like. The comparison is direct. Consider time is a thief. Time isn't literally a criminal, right? But what does a thief do? A thief takes something from us. Time takes moments from us. It takes our youth. It takes opportunities. It moves forward without asking permission. So by calling time a thief, the speaker creates a powerful conceptual image. Let's take another example. She is a shining star in our department. She isn't an astronomical object, right? The metaphor may communicate excellence, visibility, talent, or admiration. And the examination hall was a torture chamber. The writer is using a metaphor to communicate extreme psychological pressure. A useful technique. Whenever you see a metaphor, ask what quality is being transferred. In time is a thief, the quality is taking away. In he is a lion, the qualities might be courage and strength. This makes metaphor analysis much easier. This is one of the most important comparisons in the entire lesson. Let's make it extremely simple. A simile says X is like Y. A metaphor says X is Y. Do you understand? For example, Rahul is like a rocket. Simile. But Rahul is a rocket. This is a metaphor. The simile gives us a comparison. The metaphor creates a stronger imaginative identification. Let's try another. Her voice is like music. Simile. Her voice is music. It's metaphor. Now, does that mean the metaphor is always better? No. It depends on the effect you want. A simile can be more explanatory. A metaphor can be more dramatic. As an English speaker, you should learn to control both. I'll give you, the child was as quiet as a mouse. What is it? Correct, simile. The child was a mouse in the corner. What it is? There is no comparison in this. So it is metaphor. The second one is more imaginative and indirect. That's the distinction you need to recognize instantly. Now let's introduce personification. Personification happens when we give human qualities, emotions, actions, or intentions to something that is not human. For example, the angry wind whispered through the dark trees. Wild cannot literally become angry, and wind does not have vocal cords with which to whisper. But we give the wind human behavior. Another example, the daffodils danced in the gentle breeze. Flowers don't actually dance, right? In the human sense. But their movement is described as dancing. And opportunity knocked loudly at his door. Opportunity is an abstract concept, right? It doesn't have hands. It cannot literally knock. But personification makes an abstract concept easier to visualize. This is why personification is so powerful. It converts something abstract or lifeless into something we can emotionally relate to. Think about everyday expressions. The sun smiled down on us. The computer refused to cooperate. The alarm screamed at me. My car doesn't want to start today. Technically, your car doesn't have intentions, but we naturally speak this way. Ask, is a non-human thing performing a distinctly human action or showing a human emotion? If yes, personification is a strong possibility. Now let's talk about exaggeration. The figure of speech is hyperbole. Hyperbole is deliberately and extremely exaggerating. And here's the golden rule. Hyperbole is not intended to be taken literally. If I say, I have told you a million times, have I actually said it 1 million times? Probably not. If I say, I'm starving to death, I simply mean I am extremely hungry. If I say, this backpack weighs a ton, unless you're carrying an actual industrial object, you are exaggerating. Why do we exaggerate? Because exaggeration creates emphasis. Imagine a student saying this homework is difficult. Now compare. This homework is impossible. The second statement creates stronger emotion. Hyperbole is everywhere. I'm dying of laughter. I have been waiting forever. This is the best day of my life. I have called you 100 times. I'm so tired I could sleep for a year. Now, these are meant literally, and none of these are meant literally. What do you think? What they are? Correct. None of these are meant literally. When you see an impossible or widely excessive statement, ask, is the speaker deliberately exaggerating to create emphasis? If yes, think hyperbole is the correct answer. Now we enter a different category, sound devices. Our first one is alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of same consonant sound at the beginning of nearby or closely connected words. For example, she sells seashells by the seashore. We hear the repeated S sound. Let's take another one. Big blue balloons bounce brightly. Listen to the repeated B sound. And Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. The repeated P sound creates rhythm. Now there is one more crucial rule. Alliteration is based on sound, not simply spelling. For example, phone and photograph begin with the same F sound even though the spelling is different. So when identifying alliteration, don't just look at letters. Listen. This is especially important when analyzing poetry, advertising slogans and speeches. Why do writers use alliteration? Because repetition makes language memorable. Think about brand names. Many memorable phrases use repeated sounds because our brains naturally notice patterns. So alliteration can create rhythm, musicality, emphasis, and memorability. Two terms that students often confuse are assonance and consonance. Let's make the distinction simple. Assonance is equal to repetition of vowel sounds and consonance is the repetition of consonant sounds. For example, Mike likes to bike at night. Listen to the repeated long I sound. That's assonance. Another, the rain in Spain stays mainly in the plains. Again, the repeated vowel sound creates musicality. Now consonants. Consonance refers to repeated consonant sounds anywhere in nearby words, beginning, middle, or end. So remember, alliteration is usually concerned with repeated initial consonant sounds. Consonants can occur more broadly within words. Assonance focuses on vowel sounds. Think A is equal to assonance and it is equal to A, E, I, O, U, which are vowels. And C is equal to consonants and consonants is equal to consonants. It is a simple memory aid, but it can save you time in an examination. Now we come to one of the most enjoyable figures of speech, onomatopoeia. This occurs when a word imitates or represents a sound associated with what it describes. Examples include buzz, hiss, clang, splash. Think about a comic book. You might see bang, boom, crash, whoosh. The word itself almost sounds like the action. That's why onomatopoeia creates immediate auditory realism. If I write the door closed, that's factual, but the door slammed with a bang. Now you can hear the event. Other examples. The bees buzzed. The snake hissed. The clock tick-tocked. The water splashed. The thunder boomed. Onomatopoeia is particularly useful in storytelling, children's literature, comic writing, advertising, and descriptive writing. The important idea is the word is connected to the sound itself. Now let's move into contrast and oxymoron. Places apparently contradictory terms together. For example, defining silence. Silence should be quiet, right? How can silence be deafening? The contradiction creates a powerful expression. Another, bittersweet. Bitter and sweet are contrasting tastes, right? Yet we often use the word to describe experiences containing both happiness and sadness. Another, original copy, and seriously funny. The key feature is compactness. An oxymoron usually brings contradictory terms close together in a short expression. If you see two apparently contradictory words sitting next to each other, think oxymoron. Examples: living dead, open secret, virtual reality, pretty ugly, alone together. The contradiction is deliberate. The purpose isn't necessarily to create confusion, it often captures a complicated reality in a short phrase. Paradox is related to oxymoron, but we need to distinguish them. An oxymoron is generally a compact contradictory expression. A paradox is generally a seemingly contradictory statement or proposition that can reveal a deeper truth. For example, less is more. At first, that sounds impossible, right? How can less equal more? But think about design. Sometimes removing unnecessary elements, making something more effective. Another, the only constant is change. Again, it sounds contradictory. If everything changes, how can anything be constant? The answer is that change itself is constantly occurring. Another, you have to spend money to make money. At first, it seems contradictory, but investment often requires spending before generating returns. So, paradox encourages us to think. Very useful. Think of oxymoron is equal to contradiction inside a short phrase, and paradox is equal to contradiction inside a broader idea or statement. Now we reach two terms that are commonly confused: irony and sarcasm. Irony involves a contrast between what is said or expected and what is actually meant or happening. For example, imagine there is a massive thunderstorm outside. Someone looks out of the window and says, "Lovely weather we are having." Obviously, the weather is terrible. The statement communicates meaning through contrast. Sarcasm can use a similar mechanism, but it is generally sharper and more cutting. Imagine someone drops a huge pile of papers. Another person says, "Oh, you are so graceful." The speaker obviously does not mean that the person was graceful. The purpose is to mock or ridicule. Not all irony is sarcastic. Irony can simply create contrast. Sarcasm usually has an element of mockery, ridicule, or sharpness. Let's consider another example. A student arrives 40 minutes late to class and says, "Sorry, I'm a little early today." That's ironic, right? If the speaker says it specifically to make fun of the situation or someone else's lateness, it can become sarcastic. Sarcasm is especially interesting in spoken English because tone matters. The words alone may not tell you the complete meaning. Facial expressions, stress, pitch, and context can completely change interpretation. That's why advanced English isn't just about vocabulary. It's about pragmatics, understanding what people mean in context. Now let's have some fun with language. A pun is a wordplay. P-U-N, pun. It often exploits different meanings of the same word, similar sounding words, or words with multiple meanings. For example, cycling is wheelie fun. Wheelie sounds like really, but refers to wheels. Let's take another. An egg's favorite day, Friday. That's a play on Friday and fry. Let's take one another. I am reading a book on anti-gravity. I just can't put it down. The humor comes from the literal and figurative possibilities of put it down. Puns are extremely common in advertising, headiness, comedy, social media, brand names, and jokes. They are also useful for understanding how flexible English vocabulary can be. The same word can trigger multiple meanings, and a clever speaker can exploit that ambiguity. Now we are moving into more advanced territory. First, metonymy. Metonymy happens when we refer to something using a closely associated term. For example, the White House issued a statement. The building itself didn't walk into a meaning and write a statement. The White House represents the administration or people associated with it. Another example, the pen is mightier than the sword. The pen represents writing or intellectual power. The sword represents military or physical force. Now let's compare this with synecdoche. Synecdoche uses a part of represent the whole, or sometimes the whole to represent a part. For example, all hands on the deck. Hands represents the sailors or workers. The hands are a part of the people. Another example, check out my new wheels. Wheels represent the entire car. The important distinction, metonymy. Associated concepts, that is synecdoche. Part as a whole, it's a relationship. Think about it this way. If I say the crown decided, the crown represents monarchy or royal authority. That's association. If I say we need more hands, hands represent workers. That's part of for whole. These devices are more advanced, but once you understand the underlying relationship, they become much easier. Now let's talk about how we soften language. A euphemism replaces a harsh, blunt, or uncomfortable expression with a milder one. For example, instead of saying he died, we may say he passed away. Instead of saying she was fired, we might say she was let go. Why do we do this? Because language isn't only about information, it's also about social relationships and politeness. Compare your performance was terrible with your performance needs improvement. The second sentence may communicate criticism in a more socially acceptable way. Now let's look at litotes. Litotes creates a positive meaning by negating the opposite. For example, he is not a bad writer. Literally, we are saying he isn't bad, but the intended meaning may be he is quite a good writer. Let's take another. That wasn't unpleasant. It may actually mean that was quite enjoyable. Euphemism, right. And what does euphemism do? Memory distinction. And litotes uses negation to express a positive or understated idea. Now we enter rhetorical territory. Antithesis places contrasting ideas in a balanced structure. For example, speech is silver, silence is golden. Speech and silence are contrasted. Another, man proposes, God disposes. Two opposing ideas are balanced against each other. Antithesis is powerful because our brains naturally notice contrast. Black versus white, success versus failure, freedom versus control, hope versus despair. Now let's look at apostrophe. This is not the punctuation mark. In literary terminology, apostrophe means addressing an absent person, a dead person, an abstract concept, or an inanimate object as if it were present. For example, O death, where is thy sting? Death cannot literally answer. Or, O time, please slow down. Time is being treated as though it can hear us. This technique creates emotional intensity. A writer can speak directly to an idea rather than merely describing it. That makes the writing dramatic and personal. Now let's look at repetition. Anaphora. Anaphora means repeating a word or phrase at the beginning of successive clauses or sentences. One famous example is Martin Luther King Jr. repeated, I have a dream. The repetition creates rhythm, but more importantly, it creates emphasis. Every time the phrase returns, the audience knows another important idea is coming. Now compare that with epistrophe. Epistrophe repeats a word or phrase at the end of successive clauses. The slide gives the famous example associated with Abraham Lincoln. Of the people, by the people, for the people. Notice where the repeated phrase appears at the end, right? So here's your memory trick. Anaphora is equal to beginning. Apostrophe is equal to ending. Think A is equal to ahead or at the start. E is equal to end. These rhetorical devices are extremely important in speeches. But why? Because repetition makes an idea memorable. It creates rhythm. And rhythm creates emotional momentum. That's why great public speakers use repetition so effectively. Now we are moving into some of the more advanced figures of speech. Let's start with zeugma. Zeugma occurs when one governing word applies to two different objects, often in different senses. For example, she opened her door and her heart to the orphan. The verb opened applies to both door and heart. But obviously the two meanings are different. You can physically open a door. You don't physically open a heart in the same way. The same verb connects two different senses. Now let's move to chiasmus. Chiasmus refers as grammatical or conceptual structure. The easiest formula is AB, BA. The famous example is ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. Notice the reversal. First, country, you. Then you, country. That balanced reversal makes the sentence memorable. Quick memory technique, zeugma, is equal to one word governing two different things, and chiasmus is equal to structure gets reversed. Chiasmus is particularly powerful in speeches because the reverse structure sounds balanced and memorable. Now let's stop and consolidate everything. This slide is important because we are moving from individual definitions to pattern recognition. Let's test ourselves. Brave as a lion. What do we have? Simile. And why? Because we have an explicit comparison using as. He is a lion. Metaphor. And why? Because the comparison is direct. The whispering wind. Personification. And why? Because wind is being given a human action. I have told you a million times. Hyperbole. Why? Because of extreme exaggeration. Deafening silence. Oxymoron. Why? Because two apparently contradictory terms are combined. Now let's build a mental checklist. If you say like or as plus comparison is simile. Direct comparison is metaphor. Human quality given to non-human, personification. Extreme exaggeration, hyperbole. Contradictory words together, oxymoron. Contradictory broader statements, paradox. Repeated initial consonant sounds, alliteration. Repeated vowel sound, assonance. And sound imitation, onomatopoeia. This is the point where memorization should start becoming recognition. You don't want to think for 30 seconds about every question. You want the pattern to become automatic. Now let's apply what we have learned. The sentence is, the fire swallowed the entire forest. Let's analyze it. Could fire literally swallow? No. Swallowing is an action associated with living beings, particularly humans or animals. The writer has given fire an action that normally belongs to a living creature. Therefore, the answer is personification. But let's go deeper. Why does the writer choose the word swallowed instead of simply saying, the fire destroyed the forest? Because destroyed gives us information, swallowed gives us an image. We imagine the fire consuming the forest as though if it were a huge living creature. That's the difference between ordinary information and expressive language. Another question. Suppose I say the fire ate the forest. Would that also be personification? Yes. Because eating is a biological action. Now, the fire spread across the forest. That's generally literal description. So one of the best ways to identify personification is to examine the verb. Ask, could this object naturally perform this action? If the answer is no, then the action is distinctly human or living. Personification becomes likely. Now let's try another. I am so hungry I could eat a horse. Could the speaker literally eat an entire horse? For most people, no. The statement is intentionally extreme. Therefore, this is hyperbole. The speaker isn't attempting to deceive us, they are communicating. I am extremely hungry. This is an important characteristic of hyperbole. The exaggeration is obvious from context. Let's try a few more. I have a mountain of work. It's hyperbole. I have been waiting forever. It's hyperbole. That bag weighs 1,000 kilos. Probably hyperbole. I am dying of laughter. Hyperbole. Now compare. I ate 3 sandwiches because I was hungry. That's not necessarily hyperbole. It's simply information. The difference is the degree of exaggeration. When an answer option says hyperbole, look for deliberate, dramatic, impossible, or highly exaggerated language. If the exaggeration is used for emphasis rather than deception, hyperbole is likely. And this brings us to the central message of today's lesson. Don't just understand English, learn to see what English is doing. This is the real goal. If someone says he is a lion, don't stop at the words. Ask why a lion? What qualities of a lion are being transferred? If someone says the wind whispered, ask can wind literally whisper? If not, what effect does personification create? If someone says I've told you a million times, ask is the number literal? No. Why exaggerate then? To create emphasis. If someone says defining silence, ask why put these two opposite ideas together? Because the contradiction creates a powerful image. This is how advanced language learning works. At the beginner level, we ask, what does this sentence mean? At the intermediate level, we ask, why is this word being used? At the advanced level, we ask, what effect does this particular choice of language create? That third question is where literary analysis, persuasive communication, and advanced English really begin. And remember, figures of speech aren't simply examination topics, they are part of real communication. You hear them in conversations, you see them in advertisements, you see them in newspapers, you encounter them in films, you read them in novels and poems, and you hear them in political speeches, motivational talks, and business presentations. So, from today, whenever you encounter an unusual expression, don't immediately think, this is strange English. Instead, pause and ask, is the speaker being literal or is the language doing something more? That one question can completely change the way you understand English. And that is the real mystery of figures of speech. Before we finish, let's conduct a rapid fire challenge. I'll give you a sentence, don't look for the answer immediately. First, identify what the sentence is doing. Question number 1. Her eyes were like stars. Now what is it? It is simile. And why? Because eyes are explicitly compared to stars using like. Question number 2. Her eyes were stars. What it is? It is a metaphor. This is a direct equation. Question number 3. The angry storm attacked the city. What it is? It is personification, right? The storm is given the human-like quality of anger and the action of attacking. Question number 4. I have a million things to do. What it is? It is hyperbole. The speaker is exaggerating the number of tasks. Question number 5. The silence was deafening. Oxymoron. The words create an apparent contradiction. Question number 6. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. What it is? It is alliteration. Listen to the repeated initial consonant sound. Question number 7. The snake hissed. Onomatopoeia. The word hissed represents the sound associated with a snake, like hiss. Question number 8. The only consonant is change. Paradox. The statement appears contradictory but communicates a meaningful idea. Question number 9. He passed away. What it is? Correct. It is euphemism. A softer expression has replaced a direct reference to death. Question number 10. She opened the door and her heart. Zeugma. One governing verb, opened, works with two different objects in different senses. I want you to remember something. You do not become an excellent English speaker by memorizing thousands of complicated words. You become an excellent English speaker when you understand how words work together to create meaning. Figures of speech teaches us exactly that. They show us how comparison creates imagery, how exaggeration creates emphasis, how repetition creates rhythm, how contrast creates impact, how sound creates memorability, and how a simple sentence can carry an idea much larger than its literal words. So don't study figures of speech merely as a list. Simile, metaphor, personification, hyperbole, alliteration, and so on. Instead, learn to recognize the pattern behind each one. When you see a comparison, identify it. When you see exaggeration, identify it. When you hear repetition, listen to it. When you see contradiction, investigate it. And whenever a sentence seems unusual, ask yourself, what is this language trying to make me see, feel, hear, or understand? Once you start asking the question, you aren't merely learning English anymore. You are learning how English creates meaning. And this is the real power of language. Thank you so much for being with me till the end of the video and being on Universal English with Happy. If you may have some topics in your mind, do comment and let me know. I'll definitely make a video on one and others too. There is a subscribe button below. Do subscribe my channel and press the bell icon so you never miss an update. Happy learning!
वीडियोस बनाने हैं फिल्मोरा है ना।